And now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our main speaker, Rabbi Greenbaum, who really doesn't need an introduction, the principal of Cheder Menachem. Please give him your attention. Thank you, Rabbi Greenbaum.
Thank you, Mrs. Taylor. When addressing Neshei Chabad in connection to Vav Tishrei during Aseres Yemei Tshuva, I think it's also worthy to spend a few moments to also make mention, to celebrate, to bring to light the fact that during Aseres Yemei Tshuva we also mark the yahrzeit of another Rebbetzin, a heroine in Chassidus Chabad, namely the Rebbetzin Dverleah, the mother of the Tzemach Tzedek, daughter of the Alter Rebbe, whose yahrzeit, Histalkus, took place on Gimel Tishrei, on Soim Gedalia. And the story of Rebbetzin Dverleah's Mesiras Nefesh and her commitment to Chassidus and to Rebbe and to Chassidim is probably something that paved the way for the Mesiras Nefesh, the commitment of Rebbetzin Chana, and indeed for all of the Noshim Tzidkoniyes, Neshei Ubnei Chasidim throughout the generations, who stood at the forefront of Mesiras Nefesh in the most difficult and trying of times. And it's worthy to mention a little bit about her Histalkus. If we go back to Shavuos, in the year Tov Kuf Nun Beis, 227 and a half years ago, the Alter Rebbe was sitting at the Farbrengen together with the Chassidim, and those that were looking to oppress and to oppose Chassidim and Chassidus were gaining somewhat of an upper hand over the Alter Rebbe, making life very difficult for the Alter Rebbe and for Chassidim. And the Alter Rebbe, during that Farbrengen, cried out from the bottom of his heart to the Baal Shem Tov, to the Magid, and he said, the Helike Zayda, Baal Shem Tov, my Helike Rebbe, the Magid, please come and be Me'orer Rachamim on my behalf and on behalf of Chassidim and for Chassidus. And in great devotion and great emotion, the Alter Rebbe fell into a faint. Immediately, a doctor was summoned, his family members came running, but it was difficult for them to revive the Alter Rebbe until a little boy who was 2 years old and 9 months, Tzemach Tzedek, came running into the room, and he sees his grandfather laying there on the floor in a faint. And he immediately laid down on top of the Alter Rebbe and he started screaming, Zayda, Zayda. And to that, the Alter Rebbe opened his eyes. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, Zayda, give me a hand, give me your hand. And the Alter Rebbe gave the Tzemach Tzedek his hand, and with that the Alter Rebbe was revived. And the Alter Rebbe said a statement at that time. He said, Zeh Yenachamenu. This Menachem Mendel, the name Menachem, Meloshen Nechama, Meloshen Nichum, Zeh Yenachamenu. In the subsequent days, over the course of the summer, the Alter Rebbe sent shluchim to Anapola, to the Kever of the Magid, to Mezhebush, to the Kever of the Baal Shem Tov, to be Me'orer Rachamim for the situation, for the kitzrugim that he saw were going on high. And then on Motzoi Shabbos Slichos, the Alter Rebbe called in a group of elder Chassidim. And he said to them that I sense that the kitzrugim that are going on high are being turned from the Chassidim in general and being focused on myself in particular. And I don't think that I will be moitzi shnosai. I don't think that I'm going to live past this year. And the Alter Rebbe began giving these Hasidim instructions of how they are to support and help the Mittler Rebbe in his leadership after the Alter Rebbe's Istalkus. Unbeknownst to the Alter Rebbe, his daughter, Rebbetzin, overheard this conversation from the next room. And she decided that she is going to do whatever it is in her power to ensure that this doesn't happen, to the extent that she's willing to exchange nefesh benefesh, her soul, her life, for the life of her father, the Alter Rebbe. And she came up with the following plan. The next day, which was on Erev Rosh Hashanah, not the next day, I'm sorry, a few days later, on Erev Rosh Hashanah, after Mincha, in the Beis Medrash of the Alter Rebbe, there was only a few Chassidim from the Ziknei HaChassidim that were there, and a few family members still sitting in the shul saying Tehillim, preparing themselves for Rosh Hashanah. Rebbetzin walked into the Beis Medrash. She walked up to the Aron Kodesh and opened up the Aron Kodesh. And she said, all of you sitting in the room now are witness how I, insane mind, Dvarleya Bas Sterna, am taking the place, and I'm willing to give my life for the sake of my father, Schneerson, and so that he should remain alive to be able to lead the Chassidim for years to come. That night, Rosh Hashanah night, after davening, the first thing that the Alter Rebbe did after davening was ask, where is my daughter Dvarleya? And he immediately sought her out. The custom is that on Rosh Hashanah night, we wish each other L'shana Tova, Tikosev v'seichosem, Tikosevi v'seichosemi. As soon as the Alter Rebbe encountered his daughter Dvarleya, he said to her, L'shana, and before he had a chance to say the word Tova, she said, Tata zog gornit. Don't say another further word. And she wished him, L'shana Tova Tikosev v'seichosem, before he had a chance to say anything further to Dvarleya. On the second day of Rosh Hashanah, Rebbetzin Dvarleya started not feeling well. The Alter Rebbe in the afternoon started saying Chassidus, and he said Chassidus straight into Havdalah. After Havdalah, he called in Rebbetzin Dvarleya and her husband, Reb Shalom Shachna, and in the room, Reb Shalom Shachna was standing at the wall crying, and Rebbetzin Dvarleya just said to her father, I only have one request of you, and that is that you should be mechanech and guide my son, Menachem Mendel, at this point in time just turned 3 years old, out of Rosh Hashanah. The Alter Rebbe gave his word, and the Alter Rebbe said to them that your son Menachem is going to be a nechama to me. He's going to be a nechama for you, and he's going to be a Menachem for the entire Klal Yisrael. And indeed, the next day, on Shem Gedalia, at the age of 26, Rebbetzin Dvarleya's neshama went up on high in exchange for the neshama of the Alter Rebbe, for her commitment and her dedication to Mesiras Nefesh for Chassidim and for Chassidus. In a similar vein, when we reflect upon the life of Rebbetzin Chana, it was a life which was all about commitment, all about Mesiras Nefesh. When you look at the sichos that the Rebbe speaks about his mother, when you hear the stories told about Rebbetzin Chana, these are the sentiments, these are the feelings, this is what Rebbetzin Chana was all about. When the Rebbe speaks about the fact that his father had Mesiras Nefesh, and his father was arrested and sent off to go into Golus, but all of the work that he did in Yekaterinoslav, all of the counter-revolutionary work that he did was not possible, would not be possible, without his mother standing there, supporting, with that very same level of Mesiras Nefesh, all of the work of Rabbi Yitzchak. This is Mesiras Nefesh. And then when Rebbe Leivik was sent off into Golus, the Rebbe says, Rebbetzin Chana could have stayed back at home in Yekaterinoslav. There were community members that were more than happy to take care of her, to look after her, to help her. And many families, unfortunately, had loved ones who were sent off to prison and to Golus, and they stayed home, and they sent packages to their loved ones. But Rebbetzin Chana made a commitment of Mesiras Nefesh to spend the time together with her husband in Golus. And while they're in Golus, b'Mesiras Nefesh, she went out so that he should be able to put the thoughts of Chassidus that Reb Leivik was Mechadish, the deep thoughts of Kabbalah that Reb Levi Yitzchak had flowing through his mind constantly. She went b'Mesiras Nefesh to go ahead and create the ink, as we all know. And then later on, when Reb Leivik unfortunately was nostalgic, she took the Ksavim with her. And then when she left on the Echelon, and when she left Russia, she took with her those Ksavim of her husband. And the Rebbe pointed out that to take Svarim out of Russia in 1946, 1947, was a Mesiras Nefesh in its own right. How much more so if the Svarim that you were taking out, or the Ksavim that you were taking out, were Ksavim that belonged to an individual who was a wanted man by the Russian government. And how much more so if your last name was Schneerson, the Rebbe said. But with Mesiras Nefesh, so that her husband's Chassidus should be able to come to see the light of day, so that people should be able to learn this Chassidus, she was Mesiras Nefesh to take it with her and bring it with her to freedom, so that the Chassidus can be disseminated and can be studied and learned. And the Rebbe says that from this Mesiras Nefesh, we can all take a very, very, very important lesson. Because how many times do we encounter troubles, Menias v'Yikuvim, something that gets in our way of Torah, of Avodas Hashem, and we think it's a big deal. But the Rebbe says from Rebbetzin Chana we could learn what it means to have Mesiras Nefesh. And furthermore, she paved the way for us that living in America, where the Mesiras Nefesh pales in comparison to what it was in those days, we have the strength to be able to take to do whatever it is that we need to do to overcome any challenges in our Avodas Hashem. But this Mesiras Nefesh didn't begin only at the time when she was with Reb Leivik, but as the Rebbe pointed out, her dedication, her commitment to Chassidus and to spreading Chassidus started even as a young child. When she lived in her father's home, who was the Rav in Nikolaev, Reb Meir Shleima, there were no copy machines. There was no way of Sfarim, of Sifrei Chassidus, to make their way from one individual to another individual unless somebody sat down and actually copied it by hand. And Rebbetzin Chana, as a young girl, undertook by her own volition. The Rebbe says nobody asked her to do it. She on her own, together with some of her friends, would sit when a mimer from the Rebbe Rashab would arrive in the city of Nikolaev, and they would copy by hand the pages of the Chassidus, so that Chassidim in the town should have the words of Divrei Elikim Chaim to be able to study. This is commitment. This is Mesiras Nefesh for Chassidim, for Chassidus. And for the idea of Rebbe. Any story that we know about the Rebbe's youth, where does it come from? Any story that we know about the Rebbe's childhood comes from Rebbetzin Chana. She took the time to sit with Reb Nissen Gordon, who was a writer for the Yiddish Heim, and to share her Zechronos, the original Ein B'Yisrael stories that were printed before the latest batch of the Rebbetzin Chana's memoirs were printed. And any story that we know about the Rebbe, the fact that Yud Aleph Nisan is the Rebbe's birthday is only something that the Rebbetzin shared with Chassidim in the early years. But on a deeper level, I don't think she's here in the room now, I once heard from Mora Chana Arnold, a fascinating story that speaks to Rebbetzin Chana's commitment and understanding of what it means a Rebbe. I've asked her in the past if I could share this publicly, and I think that she wouldn't mind. Mora Chana told me that after she was married, for a few years, they weren't zeicha to have children. I think their oldest son was born after 5 or 6 years of marriage. 7. Thank you. Living in Crown Heights at the time and being without children, it happened on occasion that it was necessary to have someone accompany Rebbetzin Chana to Neshei Chabad gatherings that would take place in different halls outside of Crown Heights. So Mora Chana was asked a few times if she would be willing to accompany Rebbetzin Chana. On the first occasion, I believe, Mora Chana came to 1418 President Street, Rebbetzin Chana's apartment, and she waited for Rebbetzin Chana outside the door. There was a taxi waiting for them in the front. And as they were walking to the taxi and sitting in the taxi, Rebbetzin Chana started making small talk with her. What's your name? Your husband? How long you're married? Und die Kinder, Rebbetzin Chana says to her. Your children? So Mora Chana says to Rebbetzin Chana, Wir haben noch nicht kein Kinder. We don't yet have any children. So Rebbetzin Chana says to Mora Chana, Und der Sohn weiß davon? Does my son know about this? So Mora Chana says, yeah, of course. They were in Yechidus quite a few times, asking for brachas. So Rebbetzin Chana's face lit up. And she said, with her motion of her hand, she says, ei bazei hotir von gar nicht was zu deigen. If so, if my son knows about it, you have nothing to worry about. An understanding of what se meint a Rebbe. The famous artist, Reb Hendel Lieberman, lived in the same building as Rebbetzin Chana, 1418 President Street. Hendel Lieberman was the brother of Mendel Futefas, and he was an artist, an interesting man. And it so happened that Reb Shmuel Isaac Popak commissioned him to make a painting of the Rebbe by Farbrengen. So he went ahead and he painted a beautiful painting of Chassidim sitting in 770 at the Farbrengen, and the Rebbe sitting at the head of the table. But in his vision of the Rebbe sitting at the head of the table, he painted a spodik on the Rebbe's head. And the painting can be seen in Reb Shmuel Isaac Popak's house, if it's still there. Living in 1418 President Street, he showed Rebbetzin Chana his masterpiece. And Rebbetzin Chana took a look at the painting, and she says, yeah, the alte suchen a spodik, the younger suchen a Rebbe. Says the older individuals, they're looking for a shtreimel, they're looking for the externals. The Chassidim, the young Chassidim, they're looking for a Rebbe. This past Shabbos, we were sitting Farbrengen in honor of Tishrei. Shai Berkowitz shared a beautiful story also that someone once asked Rebbetzin Chana, what's the difference between your Mechuten's Chassidim, in other words, the Friedeker Rebbe's Chassidim, and your son's Chassidim? So she says, mein Mechuten hat gehat Chassidim, mein Mechuten had Chassidim, aber mein Sohn hat Soldaten. My son has soldiers. Just you say that story over, you can't help but bring to mind. There was a Yid that lived in Crown Heights, Heshke Gansberg, Ol V'Shalom. Heshke Gansberg, after he passed away, the way it's the minig nowadays is that they give out books, biographies of Chassidim. So they gave out a book about Heshke Gansberg as well. And they tell over there a story. He says that he went on Merker Shlichus to Nehaven when he was young. And he writes there a letter to a friend of his, and he says that I was speaking to a Yid by the name of Reb David Deitch, Balabatash Yid, he says. And he says, from the Reb David Deitch told us a story from which we could learn a tremendous, tremendous lesson. This is what Heshke Gansberg writes to his friend. And he says that David Deitch tells them that he was in Yechidus by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe wanted something of him, something that was not so simple for him to actually agree to do. And the Rebbe asked him to do it. So David says that he stood in front of the Rebbe, and he stood. So the Rebbe says to him, is that maskim, you agree to do this? And David stood. So the Rebbe asked him again, is that maskim? So Reb David says to the Rebbe, was heist, mizan doch soldaten? Well, why is the Rebbe asking? We're soldiers, of course. And he says, and the Rebbe began to cry when the Rebbe heard this from Reb David. The Chassidim from Rebbe, that's how Rebbetzin Chana understood was it meant Chassidim of the Rebbe. She understood the difference what it meant, Chassidim of the Rebbe, Chassidim of the Rebbe, what Chassidim are looking for. Share a story that Rabbi said this by the Fabrengen. So sitting at the Fabrengen this Shabbos as well was a young man, Yossi Swerdlov from Eretz Yisrael. Yossi Swerdlov's mother is Mrs. Miriam Swerdlov. So Yossi relates that his mother had quite a few occasions to be in the home of Rebbetzin Chana, particularly when she was a young teenager, about 15 years old. Just two interesting stories. No major lessons, but just interesting stories. Gerrit might as well share it. He says that she was about 15 years old. She was asked to go into the Rebbetzin Chana because the caretaker that was with the Rebbetzin Chana had to go out for a while. And she said she's 15 years old. She's sitting in the house. There's nothing for her to do there. And she started wandering around from one room to the next room. And she came into one room, and this was the room where the caretaker slept. And it seems that the caretaker had a cosmetics box, which in the olden days was powders. And young Merele started playing with the box, and she opened it up, and poof, the powder went all over the floor. And a mess was created. And Punkt at that time, Rebbetzin Chana realized that Merele wasn't in the other room, and where is she? And she came to find her, and she sees her there in the room with the powder, the cosmetics powder all over the floor. And Rebbetzin Chana went and she bent down, and she cleaned it all up herself, and she turned to Merele and said, "Das bleiben zwischen uns." This will remain between us. The other story that she related was, the Yossi related, was that his mother was once walking up Kingston Avenue. Again, she was like 15, 16 years old, and she was eating a bag of potato chips. But Rebbetzin Chana is coming down the street towards her. And she didn't want to be standing in front of Rebbetzin Chana with the bag of potatoes, eating the chips. So she quickly grabbed the last bite and stuffed it into her mouth. And as Rebbetzin Chana is encountering her, she's there standing with the chips in her mouth. She couldn't say hello. She couldn't. So Rebbetzin Chana says, "Merele, was ist mit euch? What's with you? Why are you so?" So by that time, she finally swallowed, and she just said, "Ich habe a test morgen." She's nervous. I have a test tomorrow in school. The next afternoon, she gets a phone call from her sister, Rebbetzin Leah Khan, and she says, "Merele, the Rebbetzin Chana asked me to call you and find out how you did on your test today." Anyhow. So we're speaking about Rebbetzin Chana's commitment, her understanding, her commitment to what it means, a Rebbe, Chassidim. Reb Shmuel, who was also zeicher to have a close relationship with Rebbetzin Chana, once related that at a Yudalef Nissen Fabrengen in her apartment, at which just a few Chassidim were present, he was one of them, Rebbetzin Chana expressed herself by saying the following. She said, "Bam Taten in Stub," by my father in his home, and her father was Meir Shleima, her grandfather was Rabbi David Lavut. These were tremendous Talmidei Chachamim, Rabbonim, who had connections with Rabbonim all over Europe at the time. She said, "Bei meinem Taten in Stub habe ich gesehen asach greise Yidden." I saw a lot of great Jews. Aber azah gadlus habe ich nicht gesehen. But such greatness as I see in the Rebbe, that I never seen before. We speak about Rebbetzin Chana's home, being raised in the home of Meir Shleima and her grandfather, her husband Reb Leivik. It's just an interesting anecdote that when, until Tavshin Lamed, Sudas of Yom Tov were eaten upstairs in the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment. And the Rebbe would eat the Sudas up there as well. And in the years between Tavshin Zayin, 1947, and Tavshin Chav Hei, when the Rebbetzin was in Stalik, Rebbetzin Chana would join eating the Sudas upstairs there as well. So it was after one Suda, she was putting on her coat to leave, to go back home, and she was struggling to put on her coat. So there was a chassid from Chicago by the name of Rabbi Yankel Katz, who was an interesting fellow in his own right. And Yankel Katz sees Rebbetzin Chana struggling to put on her coat, so he says to her in a joking manner, he says, "Ich wollte euch geholfen, aber mestame willte sich nicht mestamisch sein mit a koyen." I would help you, but you probably don't want a koyen to have to be helping you, because he was a koyen, Yankel Katz. So Rebbetzin Chana shot back at him right away, and she said to him, "Es ist alright. Ich bin a eishes chover und a bas Talmud Chochem, dem magst helfen. I am the wife of a Talmud Chacham, the daughter of a Talmud Chacham. It's all right, you could help. Akol panim. In general, we know that the Haftarah of Chana is one which is a very emotional Haftarah. It's a very deep Haftarah, and always was so. But after Vav Tishrei, Tavshin Chaf Hei, by the Rebbe, it seems that it took on a whole different dimension as well. For those that had the schus to see it, the bechiyas that the Rebbe would cry when saying that Haftarah in particular, the Rebbe would cry at many Haftarahs, but that the Haftarah of Chana, tremendous bechiyas. And by Chassidim there was this, I don't know, it was probably more of a hergish, I don't know if it was a statistical reality, but that when the Rebbe would say the pasuk, or the end of the pasuk, El anar hazeh hispalolti, there would be tremendous bechiyas. The Chassidish hergish was that this was the Rebbe expressing kilu, like Rebbetzin Chana's emotion about the schus. And for sure, there's nothing to talk about that Rebbetzin Chana didn't just merit to see the Elanar Hazeh Spalolti, but as we are sharing these stories, the whole Olatz Libi B'Hashem, Roma Karni B'Hashem, Kisimachti B'Shuasecha, this is something that Rebbetzin Chana was zeicha, certainly at least in the last 17 years of her life, to be able to have. But we speak about the Haftarah of Chana, and we know that the Rebbe in the last years would always learn lessons at the Vav Tishrei Fabrengens. So I just want to share one lesson, a lesson in chinuch. The Rebbe once told Yankel Hechtel V'Sholem, J.J. Hechtel V'Sholem, in regards to the Mosad Machan Chana, the Rebbe told J.J. Hecht that I have a special affinity, a special connection to Machan Chana, because it's named after my mother, und sie hat sich hereingelegt in mein chinuch. And she dedicated herself to my chinuch. On Yud Beis Tammuz Tavshin Chaf Hei, it was still within the year of Avelus. The Rebbe verbringt for Yud Beis Tammuz, Chag HaGeula. But the Rebbe said to the Olam that I'm in Avelus, so therefore, how can I verbring? Therefore, I have to do something, and I have to make a siyum. If I make a siyum on a Masechta, so then there's a cause for celebration, and that's how I could be verbringing in honor of Yud Beis Tammuz. And the Rebbe said, I'm going to choose to make a siyum on Maseches Nazir. The last Mishnah, Maseches Nazir, says, Shmuel Nazir Olam Haya. That Shmuel was a Nazir. How do I know that Shmuel was a Nazir? Because it says, that Chana says, Umayra Layala al Reishei, which we could translate, based upon Shimshon, that a razor shall not go onto his head. Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah argues, and he says, what are you talking about? The word Umayra Layala al Reishei only means that fear of man shall never pass over him. He shouldn't be afraid of anybody. And this is a machlekes in the Mishnah between Rabbi Neroi and Rabbi Yossi. The simple explanation of Umayra Layala Reishei actually is that he shouldn't really be afraid of man. We have to learn from Shimshon that it means that a razor shall not pass over his head. It's just an interesting side story that the Rebbe Rashab, one year on Rosh Hashanah, was saying the Haftarah of Chana, and he came to the words Umayra Layala Reishei, and the Rebbe Rashab started crying, and he stopped. And then he said the words again, Umayra Layala Reishei, and he finished off the Haftarah. That year was Tafresh Samach Vav. That year there were hoodlums, shall we say, from the Zionist youth and from the Maskilim that were making tremendous issues and tremendous problems for the Yeshiva Temchet Mimim. There's great descriptions of the troubles that they caused at the time. The Frierdiker Rebbe had to walk around as the Menal of the Yeshiva. He had to walk around with a gun at the time because of that. I mean, literal issues. And the Razah, the Rebbe Rashab's brother, was close to one of these hoodlums. and he got wind of some of their plans. So on Rosh Hashanah, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, he shared with the Rebbe Rashab that there's what to be afraid of. They're planning something big. And in general, the Frierdiker Rebbe says his uncle Razah was not a pachtan at all. He was a very, very strong individual, and he wasn't someone that got easily scared. But here, all of a sudden, when he heard their plans, he was scared. So he came to the Rebbe Rashab and he shared it with him. So the Rebbe Rashab says, "Was heißt? When I said the Haftarah of Chana, and I said the words Umayra lo yala reishai, which really means that a blade shouldn't go on his head and he should be a nazir. That's the pshat. I stopped. I had in mind that it should mean that we shouldn't have fear, and I said it again." So the Rebbe Rashab in the story does it the other way around. But the bottom line is that, back to the Sim of Nazir, Shmuel is a Nazir Olam. That's the Shita of Reb Neshei. So the Radak asks a question on this. And he says, I don't understand. You're saying that Shmuel is a Nazir because his mother said that a razor shall not pass over his head? You just taught us a few pages earlier in the Gemara that Ha'av Madir Espinoi Nazir, Ve'ein Ha'aim Madir Espinoi Nazir. The halacha is that the father has the ability to make a statement causing his child to become a Nazir, but the mother does not have that ability. So how could you say that because Chana said the Meir lo yala roisha, therefore Shmuel was a Nazir? Why does he have to be a Nazir? Because his mother made a statement. It doesn't have halachic bearing. And after a back and forth, the Rebbe explains the following. And he says, we know there's a halacha that when you have a child that becomes a ger when he's a little child, at the age of 13 approximately, when he's a bardas, if he's not moicha, if he doesn't protest the fact that he was brought into the covenant of Klal Yisrael, then he remains, his silence or his acceptance, so to speak, at that time, is what retroactively makes that gerus a gerus. Therefore, says the Rebbe, we could say something very similar in regards to Shmuel Hanavi. But the Rebbe says there's a tremendous chiddush over here, and that is as follows. Chana made a neder, vatidor neder, and she made a neder saying that Umayra lo yala al roish, she's going to raise this child in a manner that she's going to treat him like a nazir. It doesn't have any halachic bearing on him, but as long as he's under her care, that's what she's going to do. A neder is something that a person can take upon themselves, but doesn't have any kedusha to it. It's a nice idea, perhaps, but there's no kedusha to a neder. The moment Shmuel came of age, where he did not protest, and he accepted, so to speak, upon himself to continue living his life in that manner, that his mother started off for him when he was a child, all of a sudden, there was an upgrade, and now he became a Nazir who was Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem. All of a sudden now there was a Kedusha that descended upon him as well, and he became a Nazir. And the Rebbe says that this is a very, very powerful lesson in chinuch, especially as it relates to the chinuch of a mother to a child. There are two drachim in chinuch. Ha'av madiras b'noi nazir. A father can come along and say, you are a nazir. There's rules, there's regulations. This is how it is. This is what's going to be. Kein yakum. That's it. It's one way in chinuch. And then there's the way in chinuch of Chana Hanaviyah, where she had a child. She didn't force it upon him, but she sat with him and she explained to him his background. She explained to him his past. She explained to him how sie is gebeten beim eibishten Kind. She explained to him that she went and made a neder, that she is going to give him over to the Eibishter. Sha'altiv la'Hashem kol yimei chayov. She explained to him that she is taking a oath, a neder of Nazirus for him. And by speaking to him, and by modeling for him, and by sharing with him in such a manner, that was poil on him to continue living his life in that manner, and in a manner that brings him up a level to a level of Kedusha that was higher than before even. So yes, says the Rebbe, both drachim are necessary. Shma b'ni musar avicha, there's a time for Av Madras B'nai, it's necessary. But the Torah Simecha, the ability for a mother to educate the child in the manner that Chana modeled for Shmuel and modeled for all of us, is so much deeper and so much more powerful. It is the idea of Chana, it's the idea of Chen, showing the child the beauty, showing the child the beauty of Torah, the beauty of the way of life, of serving the Eibishter and dedicating your life to the Eibishter, that is so impactful and has such a deep, deep, deep manner and way of resonating in the life of the child. And indeed, the Rebbe once expressed himself in a Farbrengen in Tashma Malef, and he said that my mama hat sich übergegeben zu mein Chinuch, my mother gave herself over to my Chinuch, und alle Meiles, was ich hab, seinen von ihrer She'ifes. Interesting lashon. All the milas that I have are from her she'ifes. Her she'ifes doesn't necessarily mean from an action, doesn't mean it's from a tefillah, but it's from a desire, it's from a longing, it's from a way of hismasrus, of giving oneself over. That's a she'ifa when someone has a desire for something. So meine milas and a zicher, that's the Rebbe's lashon was, von ihrer she'ifes. It's interesting to note that the yahrzeit of Rebbetzin Chana, of course, is Vav Tishrei. The yahrzeit of her husband, Reb Leivik, is on Chaf Av. Chaf Av, Vav Tishrei is Chaf Vav, it's 26. It's Shem Havaya, Yudke Vavke. We know that the Gemara tells us, the Ish v'Isha Zachu, Shechina Shruya B'neihem. Husband and wife are meritorious, and the Shechina then descends and dwells amongst them. The Shem Havaya certainly descended, and Reb Leivik and Rebbetzin Chana were zoicha to see this in their lives. And the Rebbe should help that when it comes to a time that we celebrate and we mark the yahrzeit of Rebbetzin Chana, as well as Rebbetzin Tvarlei, as we mentioned earlier, that this model, or these models, of hismasrus, of mesiras nefesh, and commitment to Chassidus, to Rebbe, to Chassidim, to Chinuch, should impact each and every one of us, and it should serve and give an asinas koyach to every one of us to be able to do all that we can to educate our children in this manner, and certainly if we do so, we'll be zoicha to all of the brachas of the Rebbe, and lead our children in a manner that they should all be zoicha, and we should all be zoicha to see the ultimate fulfillment of the conclusion of Chana's tefillah of Yitin Oiz Lamalka v'Yorm Kerem Mashiachai Meher v'Yameinu.